Today is April 9th, 2021. So let's get started with the oral consent. My name is Isabel Kristen Beleg, and I'm a professor at the University of Nebraska. I'm interviewing Roxana Cortes-Mills from the Immigrant Legal Center for the Conversations Oral History Project, Voces of a Pandemic, at the Office of Latino and Latin American Studies at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. And the Chris Library at UNO. This project is in partnership with the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. Please know, Roxana Cortes-Mills, that this interview will be placed in the University of Nebraska at Omaha, Dr. C.C. and Mabel L. Chris Library, and shared with the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. If there's anything you do not wish to answer or talk about, I will honor your wishes. Also, if there is something you want to talk about that is not in the questions, please bring it up and we'll talk about it. Because we're not conducting this interview in person, I need to record you consenting. So I'll ask you a series of 6 questions. Please say yes, I agree, or no, I do not agree after each one. There are several questions we need to make sure you agree to before we go on. So the Office of Latino and Latin American Studies and Chris Library wishes to archive your interview along with any other photographs and other documentation at the University of Nebraska Chris Library. We will retain copyright of the interview and any other materials you donate to the Office of Latino and Latin American Studies at UNO. So question number 1, do you give the Office of Latino and Latin American Studies consent to archive your interview and materials at the UNO Chris Library?
I do.
Thank you. Number 2, do you grant UNO's Chris Library rights, title, and interest in copyright over the interview and any materials you provide?
I do.
Thank you. 3, do you agree to allow UNO's Chris Library to post this interview on the internet where it may be viewed by people around the world?
I do. The only thing that I have a little caveat, I don't know how the questions are going to go. Mm-hmm. So if at any point I get to talk about my parents' employment, I might want, I'll be careful to omit their names and perhaps the name of their employer. But if it does come up, I would want that to be edited out.
Okay, so if at any point you wish for something to be edited out, please, yes, definitely let us know and we'll cut it out from the upload. Thank you. Number 4, do you grant the Office of Latino and Latin American Studies consent to share your interviews and materials with the Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin for inclusion in the Voices of a Pandemic Oral History mini project, which will include posting the interview on the internet?
I do.
Okay, thank you. We have many questions in a pre-interview form that we are asked to fill out. We use that information from the pre-interview form to help in research. The entire form is kept in a secure Voces server at UT Austin. Before Voces sends it to the Benson Library and Chris Library, we would have stripped out any contact information for yourself or family members, so that will not be part of your public file. Your public file will only be accessible at the Benson Library and Chris Library. Do you wish for us, this is question 5, to share the rest of your interview in your public file available to researchers at the Benson?
I do.
And finally, question number 6, on occasion, the Office of Latino and Latin American Studies and Voces will receive requests from journalists and the press who wish to contact our interview subjects. We only deal with legitimate news outlets. Do you give consent for us to share your phone numbers or email with journalists?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, so we've done the consent, we've done this, and now we can really start working on the actual interview. Thank you for your patience. So Roxana, we're gonna start broad with this interview. And whenever I ask you a question, if you have a story or an example that is rich, feel free to share it. And I'll probe a little bit. But first, just tell me about yourself. Who is Roxana Cortes-Mills?
I am a Latina attorney, bilingual. I speak English and Spanish, and I practice primarily in the area of immigration law, and I do a little bit of family law as well. I represent low-income individuals who are in need of an immigration attorney. I love to be involved in the community and to use the talents that I have to help our community. I am also the oldest of 4 children. And so I have a brother and 2 sisters, and I'm very proud of each and every one of them. They're very talented individuals. None of them wanted to go to law school, but I don't hold that against any of them. My 2 parents live here. I'm married. My husband lives here. And my husband is an attorney as well. My parents are packing plant workers. I think that would be it in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe your social identity. Thank you so much for sharing this. And so tell me about the first moment, the first time you ever heard about COVID-19, whether it was on TV, on the radio. What was your first contact, like hearing about it?
Yes. So it was on social media. And then it was confirmed by newspaper articles that I was reading. And then I would say TV, it was everywhere. The first time that I heard about it, it's going to sound a little bit callous, but my husband was turning 30 in March of last year, and we had planned a vacation to go out of the country to celebrate. We had been working for many years and had been very, very poor for many years. And we finally had a little bit of savings to take a vacation. And so we were excited about that. And we were thinking, so we heard about that, about COVID. And our first thought was, are we going to be able to leave the country? Like, how far is this? The COVID wasn't in the US yet when I first heard it. And so our worry was, how far is this going to go? Is it going to get contained? And I would say the second time I heard about it was because Nebraska brought, UNNC is known for their biocontainment unit, right? So they brought if I remember correctly, the first plane of people who were infected were brought to UNMC. And then the third, but I would say the most important time that I heard, and that's when I finally realized how the seriousness of the virus was for my parents, because by that third instance, it was already in the US and it was already starting to spread in packing plants.
What was your initial reaction to the information when you first heard about it? Was it, oh, this is serious, or did you really not know much about it?
Yeah, when I first heard about it, I was curious about it, but I didn't realize how serious it was. Yeah. And when they started to bring people to UNNC, I thought it made me think of Ebola, and it made me think of the fact that we perhaps had seen something similar. They got it under control. It didn't affect our lives. That was it. When I heard about it in the third instance with my parents and the packing plants, I was terrified.
Right. So like when you heard that it could affect your loved ones, that's when you realized the seriousness about it. And a lot of people did. For me personally, when I saw what was happening in Italy, I think in March, that's when I really started taking it seriously. Because I have loved ones in Italy, and people were dying left and right, and I said, well, when this is going to be bad here as well, and it became bad. But in terms of your daily life and daily impacts, how has COVID-19 impacted you? And here you can talk about your family, your neighbors, your church. You don't have kids, so not your kids, but tell me about yourself and like your family and your neighbors.
Yes. So it definitely has impacted my life in every single aspect that you can think of. So first, starting in March of last year, we started to work from home, which is is a blessing that unfortunately not very many people have. I work in an office that cares a lot about the safety and well-being of our clients as well as ours. And so the board approved the move and we were able to work from home starting March. And so like last month, it's a 1-year anniversary of people working from home. That affected I am grateful for having had that opportunity, but that definitely affected how we do business, how I prepare clients, how I meet clients, because we were not meeting clients unless it was absolutely necessary. We were doing things via email with the clients that had access to email and via Zoom. But you have to remember that I represent low-income clients. So that was a minority of our clients. A lot of the clients that I represent are not tech savvy. So we had to do consults over the phone, and we had to send everything through snail mail. And consults over the phone turn into perhaps what would have taken one consult took multiple consults because we were not able to get as much information as we normally would in an in-person consults because the potential client or the client can't see our faces, can't see whatever it is that they would see that would make them trust us. So that definitely had an impact in the efficiency of our work, but we were doing whatever it took to remain safe. In immigration court, a lot of my hearings, most of my hearings were canceled, but in state court, they were not. And a lot of the times when I go to state court, my clients have to testify. And if they have to testify, I have to prepare them. So witness prep was very difficult. And we had to do it over the phone.
Oh.
And then my clients, we had to arrange also for my clients to be able to appear via TV, or if they were showing up, so that they would be comfortable with me not being right next to them, but rather on a screen that they could see me. So that it definitely affected how the day-to-day work life kind of happened, right? I think that also had an effect, and at different times has had an effect on mental health up to a certain extent, because we're very much used to having coworkers or having colleagues that we can just pop over to their office and talk to them about something really quick. And so that was something that we didn't have. Now I have to say that I am very lucky that the place that I work at quickly jumped on ensuring that we had the technology that we needed to have the day-to-day functions of the office as close to as how they were in the office as possible. And so we got programs that allowed us to have conversations online, right, and that sort of thing, but it's a little bit different. So I would say that is how the pandemic affected work. How the pandemic affected my life here at home is the fact that because I work from home, it's more difficult than ever, because I think that's always been difficult, particularly if you work in the public sector or in the nonprofit sector. It's difficult to stop working when there's so many people that need your help. And so the work-life balance has always been challenging, but I think that since working from home, that has been more of a challenge, because your home is your office.
You work all the time. There's no boundaries.
Yes. Your dinner table or your couch or your whatever space in your home is your home and your office at the same time. And so that has been challenging at times. And I think I'm definitely much better at it now. I have found different outlets, such as gardening. Well, not during the winter time, but now, right?
Right.
Yeah, I have a cat. And so there's different ways, right, that I have found to cope with that. But that also has had an effect. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that I'm lucky enough to be in that position. My husband is not. So then my home life too, while I felt comfortable and protected, I knew that my husband was risking his life every single day in our life and our safety, right? Every time he would leave the home, do his job and to go to court and sometimes go to jail and represent, do his job. I think the most difficult way in which COVID has affected my life, though, has been through my parents, because ever since the first time that my parents said a group of people at work got COVID, once we knew it was in their packing plant, I didn't sleep for, I would say, months, because it was an internal fear of thinking. Unfortunately, it's really sad for me to like even think about this, but it wasn't about thinking, are they going to get it? It was almost thinking, when is it going to be and how bad is it going to be? And the reason why it was when and not if is because I'm aware of the conditions in which my parents and many other packing plant workers were working. I knew that they were not obeying 6 feet social distancing guidelines. I knew that in packing plants, like my parents' packing plants at first, the people in charge were refusing to give them masks. And I knew that my mom was getting in trouble advocating to get masks, and she and other people started to bring masks on their own, but they kept telling the company, you are supposed to provide those things to us. We need to have enough, masks to change. And so I guess all this is to say, it with my parents and that effect that had in my life, it was the scariest, because it was just a when. And when my dad when somebody in my family, my dad, got infected, it was a whole different level of scarier than I ever thought it would be, because when we were fearing and just waiting to see like what's going to happen or when this is going to happen, when it did happen, it finally hit that you realize, and you would see things on TV of the amount of people that were dying. And my sisters go to UNMC, and so they were very much aware of how different patients were being treated, and which ones they could do something for and which ones they couldn't. And we knew that my dad is older, right? And so I don't know, it was extremely scary.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've done some research myself about the meatpacking plants, and in terms of labor laws, there's not really much sick days from what I've read. People, it's not like they can take sick days. A lot of people fear losing their employment if they stay home sick.
Yeah.
So could you say a few words about that?
There's no sick days at all. Like there's not at all. You could use your vacation time, but because what was happening is that yes, as an employee, you accrue vacation time depending on the company that you work, or either as you're working, or you get X amount of vacation days per year at the beginning of your anniversary, right? But that vacation time can only be used as it is approved. You cannot just use it. Let's say I'll say I want to take the day off tomorrow, and then you just use your vacation time. No, it has to be approved. And what was happening in these packing plants is that because so many people were getting infected, and some of them were so sick that they were out, which, everybody who was infected should have been out, right? But they were short in workers, and so not approving vacation time. So
people had to go to work.
People had to go to work, yes. And people who chose to use their vacation time to stay at home because it got super bad, they risked, and many of them got what they call points. And if you accumulate, depending on the company that you work for, if you accumulate a number of points, then you risk being terminated. And my parents were actually in that situation because we were so scared that at some point we just asked our parents, we begged our parents to like take their time off. And when infections were super high at their packing plant, they took their time off and they were not approved. And my parents said, well, we're going to take it. And they were warned that they would get points, and they still took it. And we're, in a sense, lucky that they didn't get fired, right? But what happens at the end of that week or 2 weeks that they have worth of vacation? They have to go back to the exact same place. The infection rates were not going down, they were only going up, and nothing had changed. I guess the only thing that had changed was that now they were out of any vacation whatsoever. And so if they ever felt ill, then that's where the policies change throughout packing plants across the state.
What was the state's response or the federal government's response to this situation, Roxana?
Inaction, full-blown inaction. When the governor was approached and was asked about this situation, he said, OSHA is the one that should be in charge of this. And OSHA is not doing anything. OSHA is not enforcing anything. Nothing is being done. So the little problem was like a hot potato that was being thrown, not a little problem, like the problem of the lack of protections in packing plants. It was a hot potato that was being thrown from group to group, and nobody was doing anything. And the number of infections amongst our population kept increasing, the number of hospitalizations and the number of deaths too.
And a lot of these workers are Latinos. Are there other ethnicities besides Latinos that work in these plants that are represented in these plants? Or is it just, yeah? Yeah,
there's definitely, depending on the community, there's other immigrant populations that that work there. I know there's a Somali population, if I remember correctly, in Schuyler. I mean, there's other enclave.
Some Karen, I've heard some Karen. Yeah, so it's a vulnerable like populations, and
definitely,
it's definitely a form of exploitation. But we'll go back to this in a little bit. How has COVID affected your church or your religious organization that you go to?
Yes. I didn't go to church in person for over a year. Easter was the first time that I went. It had been over a year, and I was very kind of scared to go. I went because I'm vaccinated, and the 3 weeks after my second dose had passed, and but definitely affected in the way that I could no longer go to mass weekly like I was used to, or for example, big things like Christmas and those things for our family, we weren't able to go because they're not. And in terms of the community in general, the Latino community in general, how would you say COVID has affected, broadly speaking, the Latinos in Omaha? Oh, it's hit us very, very hard. And it's affected people in many different ways, and then in many different levels, because even within the Latino population and the immigrant population, so in terms of COVID or the infection rate, I think that there's been no discrimination across the board. The best way that I can think about this, or the way that I said it in my class, was a while back in March of last year, when packing plant workers were given their letter that said that they were essential workers, and that have this letter with you in case the police or anybody stops you, because you're not supposed to be out on the streets. You're supposed to be at home quarantining, but you show them this letter because you're an essential worker and you need to make it to work. When those letters were issued, no questions were asked about whether the people that were essential workers were who they were saying they were, and whether they had immigration status in this country or they didn't. They were not asked, are you documented or are you documented? those questions were irrelevant. They were all essential workers, and they were all summoned to show up to work every single day, regardless of the infection rates. And so by virtue of that, people were affected and infected at extreme rates. Now, once those people were infected, their immigration status or lack thereof played a role, because as we mentioned earlier, I don't think there's a single packing plant in Nebraska or Iowa that offers sick leave. And so when people were infected, if their company wasn't willingly providing sick time or pay time for them to be off recovering, then the other option could be, in theory, to file for unemployment benefits. But if you're undocumented in Nebraska, you are not eligible for unemployment benefits. And even some people who are work authorized right now are not eligible to collect unemployment benefits unless they are a green card holder or a US citizen. So
like if you have your employment, your EAD, for example, but don't have your papers just yet, you can't collect those benefits.
Yes.
Which is...
So think about we have a huge number of our clients who are work authorized, but they have, let's say they're work authorized because they have a pending asylum claim, but they haven't had their trial yet. So they don't know if they won their case or not yet. Well, those individuals are showing up to work, they're work authorized, but they're not eligible to collect unemployment, or DACA recipients.
Yeah, so it left a lot of people in such vulnerable situations, sick, without sick leave, and then without work, and then without anything, without social protection. So it was just, like a terrible situation. And thank you for sharing your experience with it. What about, Roxana, how has COVID impacted the organizations that you work with and their support and resources to help COVID? Like, not necessarily your work, but other organizations that you're involved in. I think you mentioned a little bit about, in the pre-interview, Metro and other places that you're involved with. How has COVID impacted them, and what they do to help COVID?
Yeah, so I can think, so a lot of the different organizations, depending on what their capacity has been, they have made adjustments in what they have primarily done to serve with what the community needs right now, or needed a year right there and then. And a perfect example of this is Centro Hispano. It's a nonprofit organization out of Columbus, Nebraska, and they do a variety of things. They're a nonprofit that essentially helps immigrants in anywhere from limited immigration services all the way to computer classes and whatever you could think that the immigrant population might need. But when the pandemic hit, and particularly when the pandemic hit their county, they have kind of revolutionized themselves and done things to help the community, such as providing information regarding vaccines now, or information. They are showing up to vaccine clinics and providing interpretation. Connecting them with food pantries. I mean, whatever it is, they've identified the gaps in their communities, and they've kind of remodeled themselves to allow, or to answer some of the questions that people are having.
So you would say like a heavy involvement in the community, and they've done a lot, which is amazing. And we've seen that across many organizations. The response has been great, I want to say, across Omaha in general, compared to other cities or other places in the state that don't have as much, that have smaller populations, or smaller, that are more rural in nature. But you said Columbus had a good response overall?
Yes, I think so. And I mean, there's different coalitions across the state. I'm not sure if I can say some of the names of some of these organizations, but
sure.
I know that in central/western Nebraska. There's an organization there that is right now working with different people who are interested in helping the immigrant population, and they're identifying where are the gaps in services and where are the gaps in eligibility for benefits. And so I recently got a question about what government benefits are either undocumented or mixed status families eligible for, and they're not, and which others they are not. And the intention behind that question was so that they would inform themselves of where the gaps are, so they can try and fill them with private funding, so they could help the immigrant population. Now, interestingly enough, they're probably going the other side of this thing is that the first step is identifying where the gaps are. Second, I would say the second thing is locating those funds, right, and ensuring that they're private funds. And then the third part is going to be convincing those people that, or I don't know, maybe convincing is the right word, but figuring out or educating people that are in need of these services so that they are willing to take the help, because a lot of people are terrified of taking any help or, so to speak, handouts because of what effect it could have in a potential immigration case in the future. And why this is happening is because during the prior administration, the public charge was expanded. And so a lot of people are fearful that if they receive any kind of help, that they in the future will have trouble adjusting to become green card holders if that possibility comes to life.
Wow, that is, yeah. Yeah, I see. I didn't know that, but that's interesting. Shifting gears a little bit, Roxana, to last summer. Think back to last summer during the protests and the BLM movements. How did that affect your daily life? And you said you didn't participate, but how did that whole social movement affect your work or your life in Omaha?
So the only reason why I'm thinking, and I'm saying it didn't affect, is because we were in the middle of the pandemic and we weren't working in person. We were primarily doing everything remotely. But I would say that it brought an awareness to even our own organization and to how much diversity and inclusion training we'd had. Okay. And so that I would say that it had a secondary collateral and positive impact, because we realized that perhaps there were many topics that we related to diversity and inclusion that we weren't talking about and that we should be talking about. And that led to, I think it was earlier this year that we had a presentation, which is part of what we do, education and advocacy, in addition to direct representation. We talking about, it was during Black History Month that it was highlighting, but yeah, I would say it was primarily a positive impact in the sense that it brought awareness to where our gaps are. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think it brought awareness to a lot of organizations and a lot of people, whether or not, you participated. It was inevitable to see what was happening in the country, in the community, and that things needed to be different in many respects. Mm-hmm. The next section of the interview is about work, and you've touched upon that a little bit. So how has COVID impacted your work? You've touched upon that. Let me just probe a little bit. Have you received any pay cut or been furloughed, for example, financially?
No, I was very, very fortunate in that aspect. I can tell you that end of the year bonuses, or end of the year, or at the beginning of the year, typically that's when you are evaluated and you could get a merit-based raise, and those were not a possibility for anybody across our organization. And I think at that point we were, I felt grateful to have a job and to be able to continue to do what I had been doing. Well, out of my siblings, I only have one. One of my brother is the older one that is a full adult and fully employed. And he, at the time, was working for a big corporate accounting firm, and he's very used to was very used to bigger races and end of the year bonuses. And I know for them too, those were not a possibility.
Mm-hmm. And you've talked about how the nature of your job changed by switching to working from home. So you've touched upon that. I think you said that, the boundaries between work and, the personal life are blurred. Do you find that you work more hours, or could you describe that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. It's very interesting because this is not something that anybody should ever be proud of saying, but I think it's by virtue of the work that we do that I definitely don't work a 40-hour week. It's a lot more hours.
Yes.
I think it's by virtue of the fact that I work for nonprofit and immigration, and there's so many things changing all the time, right? But the difference was when we were in the office at some point in the day, whether it was 5:30, 6, whatever time it was, I would say, okay, I'm done for the day, close my laptop. Some days I would take it home, other days I wouldn't. And in the days that I wouldn't, then that was the end of my work day. And I got to come home and I got to make dinner with my husband, garden, read, talk to my mom on FaceTime, whatever I wanted to do. And that was, I had my evening to myself. And when you work from home, I think you perhaps could do that, but it's a balance that is just harder to do because your laptop is open 24/7, I think. We have the calls come to our cell phones that are work. We have an app, so the client is calling the office, right? But it comes directly to the cell phone, right? So sometimes if you are taking a break, or if it's after 5 and you already got up from the kitchen table from working, but you're in the kitchen, so right next to it, and you're trying to make dinner, and a client calls, you'll take the call because it's there and your cell phone is there. So it definitely has blurred the lines, and it does affect the amount of hours in a different way.
Absolutely. Let's see. So you said that you didn't really have concerns about finances, luckily, because you were fortunate to have a job. So that didn't really affect you, or did you?
Well, I would say, here's what I have to say, and this is maybe not fully COVID related, but I chose, and this is a personal choice that I made. I used to work in private, and I chose to move to work for a nonprofit. And when you do a move from private into a nonprofit, you take a pay cut. And while I say that I was fortunate enough to continue to get paid, I'm on a budget all the time. I make nonprofit salaries, so that means that I am on a budget, and I don't have spare cash almost ever. And that was really, really hard when I was asking my parents to take time off, because I didn't have money to offer them, to tell them, don't worry, I can help with the bills during that time. When they were done with their vacation time and they had to go back to work, if I wanted them to stay longer, that would have been impossible. I didn't have money to offer them to help pay the bills. When my dad got infected, that was also another worry of mine. Is his job gonna pay him while he's at home recovering? And if not, how are we gonna cover the bills? Are we gonna have to go in debt, credit card debt? Are we gonna be behind? Because I didn't have, well, I was fortunate enough to continue to have my income. My income is a nonprofit income, so it's very low and doesn't have any extra money for me to be able to help my parents.
Yeah, and so definitely COVID impacted your ability to financially contribute to your family, you would say. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, fortunately. And I think you talked about your work duties that shifted during COVID, so you didn't go to court anymore. What else changed?
Another huge thing that that was affected was education. So we do direct representation, education, and advocacy, and education is a big part of our mission. And is a big part of what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I educate both. I would say, and everybody in our office, right? We educate the immigrant community, and we also educate what we call the welcoming community, or sometimes that has to do with the bar. So the other attorneys, judges, people who work with children, immigrant children, right?
Yeah.
And the presentation stopped completely for almost a year.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the side that it got hit the most was the immigrant side, because typically when we give presentations in the immigrant community, we go to spaces where the immigrant community feels safe going to and attending, such as churches, sometimes libraries, schools, that sort of location. And those were not possibilities anymore. And so we had to innovate, and we have a really amazing communications team. And so we began to do some presentations on social media, because a lot of our clients have social media, and they scroll through it all the time. And so we began to talk to them about their rights and the vaccine and whatever relevant topics on Facebook.
That's really interesting that you bring up social media, because we found out, I think across other interviews and just talking to people, that a lot of Latinos are very social media savvy, and that it's been a tool for education and outreach. So you would say Facebook was the primary one, or Instagram?
Yes, definitely.
Facebook?
Yeah, our office has both. For us on our end, it would be by way of Zoom, but I know that our communications department had us live on Facebook. And I think we've reached a lot of people that way. We also have, for example, but added information to our intake hotline. So some people during different times, the last year, people have called to ask questions about unemployment and things like that, which are questions that normally we wouldn't necessarily get or answer. So our legal directors have paid attention to the types of, both our intake line and our legal directors have paid attention to the types of calls that they're getting, and they've added a couple of extra things by way of advice or information that can be given to them when they first call the hotline.
Mm-hmm. And now we're going to talk about healthcare, Roxana, and I think you're going to have some very interesting things to say, and it's specifically because, and you've said some of those things about the cost of healthcare, and because you had a family member who was affected by COVID. So how is COVID changing the way we're doing healthcare, and how do you think, what are some of the challenges of the healthcare system that you've seen with COVID?
The expense.
Yes.
Healthcare insurance is really expensive.
Yes.
And emergency medical care without health care insurance is even more expensive. So, and not everyone can buy healthcare insurance.
Right.
Your immigration status or whether you have a Social Security number or not can impact whether you can get that coverage or not too. So in that sense, I have to tell you that my family was in a privileged situation in the sense that my parents are able to buy private health care insurance. And so my dad was covered, but we were looking at the policies and thinking about how much is our deductible or how much do we need to make sure that we have, because my dad was really, really sick and he ended up being hospitalized for a week.
Oh my goodness. A UNMC?
A UNMC, yes. And we didn't know how the billing was going to end up working out in the end, right? We were just once when we were not thinking about his health and like, is he going to come out of this alive? And we were trying to be prepared for a bill. Those were my thoughts. How much is the deductible? Are we going to be able to meet it?
Yeah.
But a deductible is much more doable than thinking how much is the bill going to be if I don't have any health insurance at all. So I definitely think that people who were undocumented or people who didn't have coverage, I cannot imagine in the situation that they would be. And I can definitely see how they would be then less inclined to seek the help that they need. So for us, my dad was at home recovering for, I can't remember if it was 7 or 10 days. It was somewhere between there. And he just got worse and worse. We were able to we had a little station on the driveway. My mom had set up a table where we would drop provisions for them. My mom and dad were inside of the house and everybody was out. And they had a little table there and we would bring things to them. Liquids, food, gloves, that sort of thing. My dad was infected. My mom was not, but my mom was caring for my dad. And the oximeter, which is another thing too, that I can think that I wouldn't have known to go get it, right? We're lucky enough that one of my sisters, who's a UNMC, said, you need to measure his oxygen levels. We need to know how that's looking. And so we would bring whatever she was telling us to do. And then at some point, my dad got so sick that there was nothing my mom could do anymore. And she was terrified. And so for us, we knew that the next step was taking him to the hospital. And we knew that he had health insurance. So for us, it's like, okay, does he have a coat on? Can you put in a Ziploc bag his ID, his health insurance card? I'm going to pick him up and I'll take him. And those were the decisions that we had to make. And I cannot imagine what a person that doesn't have insurance, like what other considerations they would make.
And so specifically what prompted you and your family to go to the hospital was the low oxygen levels that your sister recommended.
My dad couldn't breathe anymore. He was having a really hard time breathing on his own. And they'd already tried, laying on his stomach
yeah.
to give a break for his lungs. We did, so another thing is that we did an e-visit online. And again, because my parents couldn't have done that on their own whatsoever, but because they have 4 children who are able to help out, we were able to arrange that. And then we gave the information to the doctor, and so the doctor said, no, he needs to go to the ER now. And so they gave me the phone number for UNMC, and then I had to arrange with UNMC so they knew that we were en route to dropping him off.
What got you through these days emotionally? Was it faith? How did you, quote unquote, survive this terrible, scary, frightening, I'm looking for the word in English, like prueba, like this, this moment?
Yeah. Yes, I think it was faith and being together. It was a very interesting way because I felt like I needed to be strong for my mom, because my mom, the strongest rock, both my parents, I think, are the rock of our family. And our rock got split in 2, and one of them was dying in a hospital, and the other rock that was left at home was falling apart. And I'm the oldest. And so I felt like I needed to be strong for my mom, and I needed to be strong for my siblings. And it was very difficult to be strong for them because they are in the two sisters are in the medical field, so they knew more than I knew what reality was. They knew that the moment my dad was put, if he got to a point that he had to be intubated, that probably was going to be the end for us, for him, for us having him in our family. So that was extremely, extremely scary. When I went to drop him off, early in the morning, and he didn't want to go. He was really sick, and both my parents were hesitant to take him to the hospital because they said everybody who goes to the hospital from work, they've died. They haven't made it out of there alive. And I didn't want to, I had that fear in my heart, and I know that my siblings had that fear in their hearts too, but I also knew that there was nothing we could do to help him at home. And my mom had already done everything that we had read about online about, helping him out with. And so we took him, and the day that I took him, I told my dad, so they said, bring him in for x-rays. We have to make sure that, his lungs are okay, or how he's doing. And so they allowed me to walk him to the entrance. And I told my dad, I said, Dad, I'm going to be outside. I'm going to be outside of your window on the street parked, and I'm going to be here for when they're done taking your x-rays so I can take you home. And that day I stayed in my car from like 9 a.m. until 6 p.m. And 6, my dad called me and he said, you should go home. I'm fine. I have a room already. There's doctors here. Just go home. And I left that day. And we didn't come back to get him until a week later. But things got worse before they got better. So he had 2 days where he was stable. And then on the third day, on a Wednesday, the doctor called. They were only calling once a day, which I know maybe it should be sufficient, but when your dad is in the hospital,
No.
one day is not enough. And you want to know what's happening. You want to know that he's okay, or that he's making progress and that he's on his way out. But it took us a while to get that figured out. But then finally we had a 1 day a week call. And that Wednesday, the doctor called and he said, I don't remember which levels, all of his levels were down. He wasn't doing well. So he called to ask to tell us that my dad had already authorized them to give him some experimental drug. There were two types of drugs.
Yeah.
That were experimental, that were given to COVID patients. He couldn't get one of them because his liver, his enzyme levels on his liver were extremely high. Mm-hmm. They'd been trying to get those down. And so they were going to try, and they were now where they needed to be, but they needed to give him medication, because if they didn't give him that medication, then they were going to have to intubate him.
Oh my goodness. Mm-hmm.
So I said, okay, if my dad said yes, then I don't think there's anything we can do or say. That time I wasn't with my mom. So I was never with my mom. I wasn't with my mom on the phone, I guess. So I had to call my mom and tell her, and my mom freaked out and she said, no, call the doctor back. I don't want them to give him any medication. What if he dies from the medication? That's the lack of information, right? We didn't have the information about what this drug is, and my head wasn't there to ask those questions when I got the call. We're very lucky again that I have a friend who is a doctor, who I went to school with, and I texted him. I said, hey, can you tell me what this drug does? Because I had called and left a message for the doctor, but they're busy. They're not gonna give you a call right away.
Yeah.
And my friend gave me some information. My mom knows my friend. We went to college together, and he and my other friends came to my parents' house all the time. So she trusts him. So I told her the information that he gave me. Then the doctor called, gave us some information. My mom was now okay. they had been administering the drug, and the drug was a 10-day medication course. And luckily, he when he went in, if I remember correctly, he was getting half a liter of oxygen. By the time Wednesday came around, he was on 9 liters of oxygen. And then after he started that medication, we were very lucky that he responded well to it, and then he was on his way out. And
God.
The day that we brought him home was the absolute happiest day, because even though we knew he had a long way to recovery, because he wasn't okay, he at least was just out of the hospital, but he wasn't okay. We knew that he was alive, and that was my biggest fear. That my mom said, "You don't want you to take him because he won't come back alive." And I brought him alive. I did nothing other than drive him, but it's a process that
Terrifying.
You don't wish upon absolutely anyone.
No, and people don't realize what you were talking about the isolation of the family from the patient. They're alone in there.
Yes.
You're getting one call or sometimes one text message from a nurse. They don't really know what's going on. I can't imagine. People don't realize how isolating and how frightening this whole thing has been for the families, the isolation from the patients. My husband's a doctor at UNMC, so I know, because he tells me, but a lot of people don't get that. Another thing that's very interesting that you said from a sociological standpoint is the social capital that you were able to get, because, you're an attorney, you're educated, you knew doctors, but a lot of your a lot of your clients, for example, they don't have that doctor friend that they can call and say, "Hey, tell me about this medication." So imagine how hard it is for those who don't have the resources that you might have, for example, because you know people, right?
Yeah, definitely. This reminds me of a story of something that happened when my dad was sick, that I think it's worth telling.
Yeah.
Particularly just because of, how it affected me, or how I took it. So when my dad, his test came out positive, we, of course, you can't go back to work. And he wasn't in a physical health position to, of course, he works, does physical labor. So I called the HR office and told them that my dad is, he tested positive, and so my parents are staying at home. The company that they work for, they did have, because by the time my dad got infected, he got infected in the fall. So COVID had been amongst us for many months. And so by the time my dad got infected, they had a policy where if people were positive and both spouses were working at the plant, they could stay at home to recover, and the company would pay them their regular rate for up to 40 hours, 40 or 30, one of the two. I can't remember if 30 or 40, for X amount of time. And the HR person would call frequently to see how my dad was doing. And then when she called and my dad was in the hospital, she said, she was, I would say, humane, and did say, I hope your dad gets better soon. And she said, well, could you please let me know when he is released, because his cover days are coming to an end. And I said, my dad's in the hospital. I will let you know when he's released. And when he was released, but he could I was holding him from his arm. He had lost so much weight. He didn't have any strength. His liver was affected, and so were his lungs. He wasn't in a state to be able to go back to the packing plant the next day. And so when I talked to the representative, they stated that my dad was probably going to have to stay at home unpaid because he'd already taken up all the time that the company had allotted for people that were similar to situation. And I said, well, I understand that, but my dad got infected at work and he's recovering from the illness and he's not in a physical state to go back to work. And we went back and forth. At the end, the representative said, I'm sorry, I understand. There's nothing we can do about it. And that was the end of it. And then we had a second phone call. And I again advocated for my dad and for him to continue to get paid at least for a couple more days until the doctor gave him the note saying that he could go back to work. And at the end, the representative ended up approving my dad to stay at home, continue to get paid until he had a doctor's note. But then at the end of the call, the representative said, your parents are very lucky to have you as a daughter because you advocated for them. And even though that should have made me really happy, he didn't necessarily. And
right.
He didn't because my parents are just two packing plant workers in a plant that employs thousands of people. What about the rest?
Right. That don't have attorney daughters. Right.
Yeah. So are they not getting paid? Do they not go to the hospital? Are they not recovering? Is that why they're still holding themselves onto walls when they are losing their balance because they're not ready to go back to work?
Right. It's just like a level of you were able to leverage, your position and your knowledge. And luckily, it's amazing you're an attorney, but not everybody has that. I don't want to say privilege. Well, it is a privilege. Not everybody has that social capital. It's the same thing that happened to us with my husband, who is a physician. And we have a lot of people that we know from the community who are Latinos who don't have the access to any medical information. And we were there taking calls and helping. But what about the people who don't have a doctor in the family or an attorney? And it's you're right, it's very unfair and things should not be like that. But thanks for sharing this deeply moving story about your dad, Roxana. I'm glad he's better. It's kind of a miracle, honestly. Hearing the stories that you hear, it's kind of a miracle. And that he didn't have to be intubated and that he came home. He's better now, right?
Yeah, he is better. He gained back his pounds that he lost. That's how my parents measured some of the pretty much well. He's doing much better.
Good. Now let's switch gears to something, a little more, still not super happy, but a little more joyful. How do you feel about going out into the world? How did you feel during COVID? Did you go out at all or?
No, during COVID, I limited. I think there were various stages. Once I realized how serious COVID was, we were ordering our groceries online and just picking them up. My husband still had to go to work, and so because he still had to go to work, and we and he works in court. And sometimes he goes to the jail. So because he was going to those places, we were limiting very much where we were going. Like I said earlier, we stopped going to church in person and just do it online. Today's Friday, and every Friday night we go to my parents' house, and we have dinner with them. When things got really, really bad, and that there were infections at the packing plant, my parents asked us not to come. And that was really hard because that was the day that's the one day that we got to see them. We got to catch up on the weekend, what's going on, what has happened. And we transitioned to, we used to talk on the phone. I used to talk to my parents on the phone every day. And we started to use FaceTime a lot, because that way I could still see them, and I could see if they were lying to me, or if they were minimizing how things were at work, or if, you know, how things were going. And then at some point, the fatigue of being in quarantine hit. And so we started to go to the grocery stores. And of course, always masked, always using hand sanitizer and washing our hands and that sort of thing. And then when the vaccine finally came out, just could not wait for my turn in line. And for everybody in my family, for my parents as well. I just wanted the vaccine. I didn't care which one it was. It was a hope for me, and yeah.
Amazing. So you said, you know, you didn't go out as much. What about with friends? What did you do to stay in touch with your friends during this time?
FaceTime. I have not seen my friends. So we typically get together we get together once or twice a year now that we're all grown, and some of them are still living in the area and others have moved to other places. But we typically have a carne asada over like sometime in the summer. And then between Thanksgiving and Christmas, we have a Friendsgiving. Neither of those two things happened.
Right.
Because we were in the middle of a pandemic.
Right. And now do you feel like you've started socializing a bit more maybe, or still?
Yes. Particularly now that a lot of my family members are vaccinated.
Right.
Yes, we are going back to my parents' house, and I'm gonna go there tonight. We go there tonight, and that's super exciting. My father and mother-in-law are elderly, and my father-in-law is immunocompromised. So we get to see them more often now, and we don't have to be as far away. When we were seeing them before, we would try to see them outdoors and try to stay farther away. And now they can come inside the house.
Amazing. Great.
Yes.
Well, this concludes our interview, Roxana. Thank you so much for participating and sharing all these very deep personal, but also social and professional experiences and stories that you've had. Is there anything you would like to ask or that you would like to say or share about your experiences that you haven't said with COVID?
I think I probably shared the majority of things. I just would, the only thing that I would say that I would emphasize that I think I've said throughout is the fact that we have to be aware that that the immigrant population has been heavily impacted by COVID. We cannot turn a blind eye to the fact that a person's socioeconomic status and immigration status has had an extra layer of effect on the impact that COVID has had on our families, and that we should do whatever it is that we can to help ensure that if this were to happen again, or right now it's still happening, right? That people have more protections, and we have bills pending before the unicameral right now. So supporting those bills, becoming involved in that movement could help a great deal, I think.
Great. Well, thank you for shedding light on that. SES, socioeconomic status, and immigration status absolutely has added a layer of complexity and difficulty during this pandemic for these vulnerable populations. And not just for Latinos, but you work with other immigrants, right? Not just Latinos?
Yes.
For all types of immigrants. And I see that at UNO with my students from other communities, Latinos, of course, but other communities as well. So again, thank you so much for this, Roxana. If I have any questions, follow up, I can email you and vice versa. And I'll be in touch with you by email. It was lovely meeting you.
Same, my pleasure.
Thanks. Hasta luego. Bye. Ciao.